first, quick announcement. We are streaming this live on YouTube. I think this is the first time we've done this, courtesy of Strawberry setting this up for us. Much appreciated. I'm hoping this will have some benefits for either folks who can't make the meeting and want to see what happened afterwards. I'm also hoping that this will give us one path to help out folks who may not be speaking English as their first choice or aren't using voice for whatever reason. Hopefully we'll get a useful transcript out of this. But we will see how everything goes. It's the first time we're doing it, and we'll keep tweaking it if anything needs to be changed. Let's see. So let me do a little bit of just a summary of where we are and what we're up to, and then we'll be getting more details from some of the other folks here. First thing I wanted to comment on is just our main area of focus right now. Some of you may have heard already, but we did have some significant slips in performance between a couple of our releases. This was particularly between the first PBR release and featurettes. It wasn't intentional, but we were focusing on a lot of other things, and it wasn't getting as much review as we probably should have. So we are trying to make that better now. We are currently focusing a significant fraction of our viewer development work on improving performance and addressing important crash fixes. Also some work going into some aesthetic concerns around PBR. So we'll be talking more about all of those. I think this is all stuff that's been announced in other meetings, but I'm not sure if it's new since the last content creators meeting, so you may not have heard it here yet. Let's see, other things. This does affect our schedule a bit, having people primarily focused on performance and related work means less time going into some other things. So we are going to have to push out some of the work we had been planning, including things like terrain painting, some of the PBR extensions. The viewer Lua work is also going to be pushed back a little bit, but these are all very much still on our roadmap, and we'll be getting them to you as soon as we can. Let's see. I also want to talk about WebRTC support. This is the ability to switch from Vivox to WebRTC for voice. Our current default viewer now has the support. That's the Atlasaurus release from a couple weeks back. The support on the server side is not universal yet. WebRTC is just in selected regions. So that will be going grid wide with the Rice Krispie Treats server release, and I don't have an exact date for that, but it's probably not going to be grid wide until a few weeks from now. So that's one of the limiting factors for getting WebRTC out. The other limiting factor is that we want to make this as smooth as possible by making sure that a strong contingent of third-party viewers have also pulled in support, and so we'll also be looking at the coverage there. Let's see. I think those are the announcements. And since most of the work right now is focused in the graphics area, would like to let the graphics folks talk about it a bit. Dave, do you want to give a rundown of more detail on what y'all are up to?
Sure. So probably of the most interest to the people here So the aesthetic changes that are coming in to address some of the feedback we've been getting since Firestorm picked up PBR, and people who weren't aware of it all of a sudden got PBR plus mirrors plus 2K textures, etc., all at once, um, along with performance hit. So the aesthetic changes that we're trying to respond to, and we talked about this last meeting. One is the linear alpha blending. In order for PBR lighting to be anywhere close to correct, we have to switch the color space that we're doing alpha blending in from sRGB color space to linear color space, and that can make some things look more opaque and can make other things look more transparent. I don't see Gaines here, but Gaines is working on a workaround for that where you'll be able to set an alpha gamma ramp on your item. And so far that's looking like it's a workable workaround, but it's still something you have to do manually. So keep an eye out for an installer that lets you play with that. If you're in the content features channel on Discord, we hope to have something out soon where you can get in and tell us whether or not it will work. Once we know it works, we might be able to find a way to apply it automatically. Well, that'll fix things like this alpha gradient box that you see here. That can look very different than linear alpha space versus sRGB alpha space. And some content has been all right with that, but some content has been absolutely not all right with that, namely hair. I'm trying to see if anybody here has hair that shows the issue.
Is Z stacking worse with PBR mirrors?
Sorry, say again, and you got to get a better microphone at some point.
Is the Z stacking worse, Dave, with PBR?
No, it's not. It's not the Z stacking. It's the it's just the color curve. Another thing that we've been getting feedback on is not everybody likes the tone mapping, and we're working on that. I think Rye will be here in a little bit to talk about that, and the auto exposure. Not everybody likes the way we're doing auto exposure, so you can expect to see some controls for that coming to advanced graphics preferences, and maybe someday sky settings. Let's see, Cosmic, did you have anything you wanted to talk about? I feel like I'm forgetting something.
Well, I've been pitching in on performance fixes, got a avatar loading improvement pushed into Delta FPS. Dave P has been on the performance train. A couple of product engine devs have as well, I think. And aside from that, also miscellaneous bug fixes. That's pretty much what I've been up to lately.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, and as far as performance goes, the featurette release, which was 7.1.8, there was a massive frame rate hit there. And Atlasaurus 7.1.9, we got a little bit of improvement, but we didn't get back to baseline so far. And Delta FPS, which is 7.1.10, it's tracking pretty close to where we were before the featurettes release. And the release after that will have some of the things that we're talking about now. The main fixes in Delta FPS have to do with texture streaming, and like defaulting mirrors off, things like that. Oh yeah, and Veer just reminded me in a message, anti-aliasing. We also got some feedback that folks who went from having ALM off to being forced to have ALM on really don't like the look of FXAA. And so we've added support for SMAA, and Ryan did a quality pass on the FXAA and found something that happened that made it not work as well as it should. We were doing a noise filter before we did FXAA, and it was confusing the edge detection. So expect improvements to anti-aliasing quality, not in Delta FPS, but in the release after that. And yeah, the as Joe says, the sun is in fact unrealistically dim. Thanks for reminding me. We are looking at some controls that might go into sky settings to help with things like auto exposure and tone mapping. And I'm pretty sure when we do that, we'll look at adding a sun intensity multiplier because it's right there. Won't be physical units just yet, but you'll be able to eyeball it. Yes. Yeah, and people are getting kind of realistic light intensities for very bright lights by stacking up point lights. That's another thing we need to address, but that'll come with the GLTF CNN port with lights punctual. It prescribes physical units for importing lights from Blender.
I think that's been one of the problems the most with people handling PBR is the fact that everybody says PBR is in all the games, SL's just getting up to date, but most other games have human Earth-based morning to night. SL has a little bit extra, and so that's why people have found it difficult to tackle.
Yes, the sky settings have definitely been a challenge. And yeah, SL sky settings are all over the place. That challenge was equal parts, it continues to be equal parts, converting from the linear space, sorry, converting from sRGB space to linear space. So our lighting functions used to be in the wrong color space. And also going from 8-bit color precision to 16-bit float color precision, which is where a lot of the bugs you see, where sometimes we go someplace and things will go like black or like solid white and glitch out. We're still sussing out some of that stuff. So there's fixes for that going into Delta FPS. But those usually come.
Very dependent on the EAP, the bug with the things going either bright white or black, because it happened on my region the other day, and it was the first time I'd ever seen it happen. And I changed the EAP setting, and it went away.
Yeah, it happens a lot when you're transitioning from one sky setting to another, because it just does a sweep through a whole bunch of different sky setting values, and if any one of those produces like a divide by zero, it can just corrupt the whole render pipe until a bunch of images get reset. And it can also happen if you position a point light in just the wrong place compared to another piece of content. It's possible to get a divide by zero. So as we find, as people report places that repro that issue, we go there, figure out, like trace it, figure out where that is coming from, and then patch it. But it has been a bit of a whack-a-mole there. It's a big grid. So please do keep those bug reports coming. If we don't have anything else, is it time for Q&A?
I think we're open for Q&A now. Yeah, covered our announcements already.
Oh yeah, sure. Floor is open. So oddly enough, LL did work with the Marvelous Designer team, but not for Second Life. We had Marvelous Designer integration in Sanzar. I worked on that. And there are some challenges that are peculiar to Second Life. The way our data model works. Where like one of the issues with the Marvelous Designer workflow is I'm not sure how they've done it in Unreal, but when I was working with before, the workflow was that you'd import your clothing, drape it over your avatar, and then bake out the result of the simulation to a new mesh. And the way that works in Second Life, that creates a large amount of data that we have to hold on to essentially forever. Which is one of the reasons you pay per mesh import. So that would basically be giving everybody free mesh upload. So a prerequisite for doing something like that would be some way to do a temporary mesh that we can garbage collect when you overwrite that slot. Yeah, so using a technique like that would make it very difficult for people to do things like build clothing against a particular avatar body and then export it for sale. It just gets more complicated. So it's kind of dumb, but the hard part is the data management, not the cloth integration.
But how much resources and how hard would it be to allow or do you already do it and I just don't know, the animation cache from, like, if I wanted to create a dress and have the dress, be affected by Linden Lab Wind or an animation cache that I save out of Marvelous Designer or whatnot. Do you see where I'm trying to go with that? Like, I understand the the issues that you would have, yeah, because creating for all of the bodies is a nightmare, number one.
Yep.
So, but I mean, that's why only creators only pick like maybe a small little handful compared to all the bodies that are out there, which is sad. But so I get that part of what you're saying. But what about like, because like in Marvelous Designer, you can save out the animation cache of the simulation of the cloth, I guess.
Yeah, so you model your clothes as a clothing template. So it's an actual physical model of cloth, not a 3D model of what the cloth looks like. And then when you import it, you run the draping simulation of that cloth on top of whatever mesh that your avatar is, and so it's like you're letting the t-shirt just fall over your avatar body, and it resolves interpenetrations. Once that's done, you have to bake out a mesh that has skin weights specific to that skin, and you also have to do hidden surface removal on the body underneath the skin, because the alpha mask cutting that you normally have to do by hand, you end up having to do that automatically, or else it just turns into a lot of work. So these are all things that are solvable, and yeah, and as Christy says, the bake service would be the kind of thing that we'd have to set up for meshes. So these are all solvable problems, but it's a major project, and right now we have several major projects on deck that we need to complete first. Like,
Yeah, people are
I would be very surprised if we did something like that before we did bomb materials. Put it that way.
I think that the cost factor is sort of moot, because if you turned around first and you screened every individual body, like we can't expect you to put every single body in the stack, but if you approved a certain amount and you added to it legitimately, but it sort of was a known body and they signed on for being part of a program, and then the content creator could then just pay $5 and they're one and done, versus 27 hours of rigging to 15 bodies, and that's such a made up amount of hours, it would win. People would rather pay the $5-10 every time, I think.
Yeah, and that's not what happens. Like imagine if every time, like this is exactly what it is. Imagine if every time you right clicked and edited your appearance, you generated 5 megs of garbage. That's what it is.
I got that part. I'm just sort of saying that when you did mention the cost of the missing the uploads and things, that part's just irrelevant in the bigger scheme of things versus the time and stuff it takes. But I got you don't want the trash.
No, because the extra trash adds problems with performance, and then complaining about performance, so they got to balance all that stuff, of course.
Right.
It adds cost. Like we have to pay to store all the assets a certain amount every month. And when that cost goes up, we have to increase the cost of something else that we provide. So, and I think everybody would agree the rent is too damn high already. So anything that ups that cost is a non-starter. And doing something like that without upping that cost becomes a major project. It's not just something that we could lift from the Sanzar integration and place into Second Life. And that's the main thing. That and the opportunity cost. Like I said, I don't think we do we wouldn't do that before we finish the Blender scene import. And I don't think we'd do that before we did something like bomb materials.
Speaking of bomb materials, is there any status on the 2K textures for bomb?
Yes, that is a thing that I saw something fly by about at a meeting. I know someone is working on it. But I don't know what the status is as far as its release schedule. I know the work is mostly done.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows release schedule yet, but it is very much in progress, and I think there may be some early prototype in one of the dev grids at this point. So that's you know, promising at least. No, I thought it was one of the other grids, Brad, but yeah, no, it's not on a D.
Let's see. There's a question about creating objects that have both PBR materials and previous materials built into it. Yes, in certain applications, old materials will still be a better choice over PBR. Like you generally can't take your existing like diffuse map and use it as a base color map and get the results you want. For example, the base color map tends to have to be brighter. And a mirror like reflection on the object, even if you only have a diffuse, that's because the metallic roughness texture defaults to white. So you'd have to set your roughness to 1 and your metalness to 0. And that would make it not have a mirror-like reflection. So yeah, if you're not used to PBR, it doesn't have an analog to the existing Second Life materials. So if you're expecting it to act anything like the existing Second Life materials, it doesn't. It's a completely different lighting model. So bottom line is, if you can get the look you want and you've got content that works well with blend fawn, by all means, and that's what the legacy lighting model is. It's blend fawn. By all means, keep using that material system. But that's gonna be less and less the case as time goes on, because all the tools that you use are going to start focusing on PBR. Like Blender 4.3 has, like, people ask for a shader node graph editor. Blender 4.3 lets you build a shader node graph editor that outputs GLTF. It has a node that is the GLTF node, and you plumb all your textures into that, and you'll be able to export from that into Second Life and not have to worry about redoing your materials.
I'm glad you've clarified that, because there seems to be like this preconception that we should be supplying 2 sets of textures, and that doesn't seem to be realistic for some of us.
Yep. Someone asked about transmission IOR. The way we're doing support for extensions like that, transmission and IOR are GLTF extensions. The way we're doing those is we're implementing them against the prototype GLTF implementation first. And then once we have a known working implementation that passes the GLTF tests, then we look at how we'd integrate that with the material items that you can trade as assets and apply it to the material inventory items, and how we can apply that to prims and legacy meshes. And as Veer said earlier, that work is on hold while we adjust performance. The work is mostly done in a side branch for the GLTF sandbox implementation. But we need to get that into the develop branch and tested to the point where we're confident that it will never change before we put it in a place where to be able to put it on content, if that makes sense. So I'd expect that to be going, get picked up again after, not after this next release, but after the release after that. For kind of holding off on changes that would put the performance changes at risk until after we get one more release focused on performance after Delta FPS. Does that make sense?
Who's asked a question in YouTube? I'm not sure who's actually monitoring that, and it's not about GLTF. Sorry, Dave. But somebody's asking if why I'm guessing they mean the mobile viewer. About how it immediately logs you in when you open the app instead of choosing your destination instead. Does anybody know an answer? Because she looks very sad.
I don't have an answer, but I can tell you that the mobile viewer is far from feature complete, and the team working on that is adding features like that as fast as they can. And if something is missing from it that you want to vote for getting added sooner, please go to feedback.secondlife.com and look for other people who've asked for the same thing or ask for it again. And that is a list that the team actively monitors.
I actually have a marketplace question, and I know Garfield is here. Is that okay to sort of tackle its content created and sort of purview?
Sorry, there was a bird squawking into my ear. What was the question?
Okay, so the website's had a big changeover, and a lot of people are very about it, and that's fine. But I noticed, or it seems more noticeable, that when you choose to decide the unpacking requirements for an object, when you're listing an object, it's got unpack or where, and when you choose unpack, which these days is done more with unpacker HUDs than any other time in history, there's a big amount of text on the listing that suggests that because you've picked that selection, that the only option for the customer is that they must find a sandbox or land to res the item to unpack it. And that's not the case. And it's not even the case if it's not an unpacker HUD. In some cases, if you know how to Second Life. So it feels like a really big deterrent on people that may be new or not have land or understand that they can still unpack. And it just seems like there should be an extra option in there on the interface to suggest that an unpacker HUD is available. Because if you don't select it, then it does this big amount of text that says it's unpacked and that you can just wear it from the folder. So you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation. Like there's no option for another scenario.
Yeah, that would be a good one for the web user group and also for feedback.secondlife.com. And I'll reach out again to the web team, the folks who deal with marketplace. It would, because this isn't the first time that marketplace issues get brought up at this meeting, because there's a lot of content creators here who deal with the marketplace, and it would definitely be good to have people from that team here.
Garfield's right there, but
Oh,
also,
Garfield. Oh, hi, Garfield.
But that's why I brought it up. But they cancelled yesterday's meeting, but we have brought up at the web user group meeting, and I kind of overstepped and suggested that if they did an extra meeting in the month, which they want to do, is that they tagged it onto this one once a month, that they sort of made this one a 2-hour session where it ran over, because as you say, and as I've said before, this is the group that will end up at that one and benefit from the crossover. So I hope that does happen in the future.
Yep. So yeah, I said that. Is there anybody who would want to talk about that issue with respect to the marketplace team?
Not sure if Garfield heard what I actually said. Problem I will do.
I'll just cap up. The issue was that on the marketplace, when you choose an unpack option, if you choose unpack instead of where, you get a wall of text saying that you have to, the resident will have to be in a sandbox or somewhere that they can res things, and allegedly that's a lie. Question mark.
Yeah, not a lie, but it's one of those things where you could kind of go, oh, I don't have land, I better not buy this thing, because majority of people use unpacker HUDs these days, so that's moot. So yeah, okay, I'll CC you. Hi,
Wonderful.
Ian. Thanks, Dave.
No, you can ask. What about the anim file? We still have 20 minutes to kill.
You want to know the format for the anim file? I'm pretty sure that there is a page for that. Yeah, I think there's a page that describes the structure, and I will try to dig that up for you. Just a second, I'll see if I can find it. It's fairly convoluted because it's not a real format. It's just somebody added support for kind of our internal data representation one time, and it kind of took off. So I'll dig that up just a second.
Yaha! Good old wiki.secondlife.com. Oh, I missed the question about morph targets. They might be out of my chat range. This is a pretty big meeting. Yeah, would you mind repeating the question? I don't see anything in my back scroll. When SL gets GLTF more targets, would it be possible to swap out vertex maps as well as to change vertex weights? We're trying to take the approach that will hit all of the musts and shoulds of the GLTF spec. And with regard to morph targets, you essentially get like 3 channels that you'd be able to modify with the morph target slider per mesh. I can't remember the actual limitation off the top of my head, but it's like you get 8 channels, but a position counts as 3 channels because it's got an XYZ. So you could have like one morph slider that modifies a position and a normal for your vertex stream. I say A, I mean like for each, for the entire mesh. But then when you get into things like texture coordinates, they'll start eating more channels. So L set alpha, L set color, etc. for PBR materials, we are planning on making those implicitly access the PBR equivalents when a PBR material is present. But we're still in that odd place where a significant number of users are on a viewer that doesn't support PBR, so there's still no good answer to which channel it should modify. So the least bad thing to do right now is to leave the behavior as is, but once the number of users who are on PBR only viewers, or PBR compliant viewers, sorry, I shouldn't say PBR only because that's not a thing. Blend font will always be a thing. Yeah, but you know what I'm trying to say. Once the number of people on Old Firestorm gets low enough, then we'll start making the LSL API do the implicit helpful thing.
Well, that's really good to know because I don't think that I'll be creating for legacy materials. I don't know. I haven't even gotten into it. But if you think that in the future everybody will switch to PBR viewers, then why the extra content for me, you know?
Well, right. The idea is that artists should not have to make a non-PBR version of their PBR stuff. And hopefully not too long from now, that will no longer be a thing. Like viewers that show the blend font version when the PBR version is present, that won't be a thing in the not too distant future. But for now, that's still a thing while we address these performance issues. Like, if it wasn't for the performance issues that we found out about, that would already not be a thing. Let me put it that way. But those kind of came out of left field.
I read somewhere
Yeah,
that
I
there was
guess there's like
actually
a bias,
sorry.
isn't there, with people testing new features tend to have like faster machines, like content creators as well.
It's a little dumber than that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the feature X viewer had some bugs in it. Like the slowdown for most people doesn't actually have anything to do with PBR, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with like any of the mirrors or 2K textures or anything like that. For most people, the stuff that killed performance was just some bugs that we didn't catch before we shipped it, and that happened to be the first version of PBR that Firestorm picked up. That's why we were able to get Atlasaurus out with performance fixes so quickly. And now we're going back and doing some extra polish to address the performance issues for folks where it wasn't just those dumb bugs; it was other things that it actually is from PBR. Because there are some machines like NVIDIA GT 1030, for example, the 2 gig version. Like half the people who have one of those just could not run PBR because it would eat all of their VRAM and then crash. So we've got a bunch of changes in the Delta FPS branch that should make Second Life run great on those cards again. In fact, I was just at a meeting with 30 avatars using a GT 1030 and getting 20 FPS. So, yay! But yeah, what I expect to happen is that Delta FPS will get us pretty much back to baseline, and the release after that will have Second Life running just tip top.
I read somewhere that there's a possible problem with swapping alpha options like hiding and showing items in PBR via script, that it's not working the way it should or should be intended.
Yeah, L set alpha hits the blend font alpha, it doesn't hit the PBR alpha. Same thing with L set alpha blend mode. So you have to use the PBR specific LSL call. The plan right now is to make the blend font specific call do the automatic conversion for you at some point, but that's not in yet.
Any knowledge on when that will happen? Because that's kind of a lot of people's product. My products rely on that with normal blend fong, but you know, if I came up against that in PBR in the middle of getting release ready, that would shut down the release.
Yeah, and changing your scripts is the immediate workaround, but that is a lot of work. And I honestly don't know when it's going to happen. It could be a month, it could be 3.
Soon.
Yeah, this is quite the crowd. It's funny what happens when you post something to the YouTube channel. Looks like Riot did show up. I didn't want to steal Riot's thunder talking about tone mapping. That's some other another thing that we're trying to add to advanced preferences and maybe some days guy settings is control for turning the tone mapper on or off or choosing a different tone mapper. Ryder, do you want to talk about where we're going with that?
Yeah. We're looking at changing the default tone mapper to a newer tone mapper from Chronos called Neutral. It results in kind of a brighter and more saturated scene in most cases.
think your microphone cut out. Well, he addresses that. These changes are going into the develop branch right now. So if you know how to punch the buttons on GitHub to get builds of that, you can get it to access to an installer to play with, but we don't have it in any of the RCs yet.
Oh, yep. Hello. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and there's some new debug settings to control wet tone mapper. ACES will still be around as an option, as well as kind of like an option to mix between the two tone mappers, or not two tone the tone mapper and like the linear color of the scene.
Yeah, we're calling that tone mapping strength.
Yeah, strength.
Did it cut out again? As far as authoring content, the message that we're trying to make sure all content creators understand is that you should not put the tone mapper in your textures. So like when you're in Photoshop and you're going to export out and you see options to do like color correction, tone mapping, don't like leave it in that linear space. Well, technically it'd be sRGB space, but like don't bump the saturation or all that. That's something that is subjective and will change from scene to scene, and will change from like individual preference to individual preference, and the render engine will do that at the end.
Yeah, I've noticed that some creators, if you add too much saturation, that you'll come around something and there'll be a point where it just all cancels each other out. The light bouncing off is equal to the light being represented in texture, I guess.
And yes, you can still use ACES and Substance in Blender. I'm not sure where those tools are at as far as picking up Chronos Neutral, but it is showing up in more and more tools. But you should not export. You shouldn't. There's an option an export where you can actually bake the tone mapper into the texture. Don't do that. Does that make sense? Like there's an option for, yeah, don't bake, you can bake shadows into the ambient occlusion channel. You shouldn't bake reflections for most cases. Shouldn't bake specular highlights for most cases. Shouldn't do any kind of baked lighting whatsoever, except for the ambient occlusion map. And you shouldn't apply tone mappers to your base color texture. And that'll let us do interesting things like put tone mappers into sky settings, and expand like the number of tone mappers you have access to for your particular build. Yeah, you'll still be able to do what you see is what you get by choosing a tone mapper in SL that matches the tone mapper that you're using in your tool, or using no post and working in linear. And that's what you should be checking against is if you're using the no post option, which turns off the tone mapper and just shows you things in linear. If you're using the tone mapper strength and setting that with 0 and doing linear, and you're working in linear in your tool of choice, you should be verifying that you're getting what you see is what you get on both sides there. And if you're not, submit a bug. Because we're trying to match the content creation tools as closely as we can, as long as the lighting is the same and the tone mapper is the same. And that's the other thing. Also, you should also be using the HDRI preview button and develop render tests to use the same HDRI and Second Life as you're using in your content creation tool. The tone mapping, we're talking about putting it into advanced preferences, having a combo box and a slider there, and maybe someday sky settings.
We're just about at time here, so might maybe fit in one more question.
Yeah, sorry to take over there, right? But you know, microphones, they betray us. What about GLTF rigs? There hasn't been any GLTF work for about a month or two now. But the local preview now does support animations. And if you go to debug settings, there's a oh, what is it? Oh, it's not there now. I was about to say there's a debug setting that lets you control which animation is being played. Maybe it only shows up if you played an animation. Yeah, it's develop GLTF open. We'll let you do a local preview. If you're on the some regions on a DD, like the Rumpus Room regions on a DD, you'll be able to upload. And other people will see the object and it'll play its animation. But it just picks the first animation it sees in the file and plays that on a loop. There are fun things in the spec that we haven't implemented yet. Like animation pointer is one. So right now you can only animate position, rotation, and scale.
What else are you supposed to be able to animate?
Oh, we had support for animation pointer. It's pretty much any attribute can be animated. Like you can animate a material color, for example.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah, you just messed up because now every content creator is going to want that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea. Is focusing on which parts of the GLTF spec Blender works well with, and then making sure Second Life works well with those too.
I'm going to assume that if it works with Blender, it will work with Maya as well for the Maya users.
I don't know. That's probably not a safe assumption.
Fair. Very fair.
But we will focus on Blender first, because that's what most of our content creators use. And as far as animating avatars, what I expect us to target first is being able to do arbitrary skeletons with Animesh. And let you do essentially what you do now with rigged meshes for the existing avatars and animations. I don't expect us to have a way to like import a arbitrary skeleton and swap out your existing avatar, just because there's so much built up around the existing animation system. Like this existing animation system isn't going away. So you should be able to use GLTF to make rigged clothing. So make it in Blender, export as GLTF, import it, and if it's following the same workflow that you do now with Avastar, that should just work and have the materials applied and animate with your avatar just as it does today. But if you want to use a skeleton that's not the bento skeleton, then that would be more like the animation. Does that make sense? The Animesh system. NPCs and whatnot. Yeah. The local preview that we've got now, that it works with arbitrary skeletons. There is a node limit at the moment. I can't remember what the number is. So if you import something that's got more nodes than that, it'll look broken. But that's a temporary limitation. Yeah, and emphasis on local preview. Like this isn't hitting the main grid anytime in the next quarter. It's got a long way to go to make sure everything is solid. Like the sim side integration for keeping the nodes in sync is still very much a work in progress.
Yeah, it's definitely demoware at this stage, but very exciting stuff. You should probably wrap it up here. We're a little
Yep.
past time, but I wanted to thank everybody for coming by and a lot of good questions. And hope the new YouTube stream works out well. We'll be talking to you next time.
Thanks, folks.